Hi, thanks for downloading our recap of last week's webinar, Does Your School Website Need a Makeover? Originally given by Fawn Sweeney, our information architect and UX designer, and Alan Yen, that's me. I'm the creative director and president here at iFactory. We're going to step you through real quick some of the slides that we did last week and just talk through some of the high-level points. First, we're going to tell you a little bit about us so you know who we work for and what we do. Talk a little bit about the definition difference between a refresh and design, and then walk you through a case study that we're pretty proud of, our recent launch for Bryn Mawr of their brynmawr.edu site. And then I'll wrap up with some lessons learned because, like I said, this is a recap. So Fawn and I have been each working in interactive media for over 10 years at this point. I've been closer to 20 if you count other types of projects. And we've done a lot of work for schools and higher ed in particular. And if you look back at our history, I think we're pretty proud of the fact that we've hit probably closer to 200 successful client relationships now, with about 90% of those being repeat business. And in particular, we've got a process that we on a couple of key points, and that includes being very user-focused and audience-focused, trying to help you guys build consensus within your institutions, which is very, very difficult since higher ed institutions don't operate like corporations, and managing content, which has become the big issue for the day for Marcom people in particular, as well as dealing with IT. 10 years ago, when we were just doing the first generation of websites, you didn't have all these different systems that are out there. So with all that said, some of the great colleges and universities that we've had the chance to work with are locally BU, Harvard, MIT, Tufts, Wheelock College, and then not so locally, Yale, Martin, Harvard. But it's just so that you guys know that we've had the chance to work with some top-tier institutions and hopefully can bring some of those lessons to you and share them with you. So that's enough about us. So the first is, why are we doing this thing called a refresh versus a redesign, and which one we're supposed to do? Well, a refresh, if you think about it in terms of, let's say, redoing your kitchen, which I know is the technology that I like the best, a refresh might be about, let's say, maybe updating the appliances, redoing the floor, but really leaving major structure. And the reason why you do a refresh is because you've got some objectives that aren't being met. Nobody likes the color anymore. The brand isn't being properly expressed, and you don't have a lot of time or budget to do things. So that's when you look at this sort of tight situation and you say, well, what can we do with leaving everything in place and then really just updating the look and feel? A redesign, which is the true process of solving a design problem again, really requires dealing with analysis and going through a full process that allows best possible technology design recommendations for you. That's akin to knocking some walls down, bringing more light into the kitchen, getting new appliances, changing the layout, and that is really something that's called for sometimes, particularly if your site is 2, 3 people and hasn't been designed to accommodate the technology and its trends, which are really, they're important, particularly to perspectives who notice these sorts of things. They might not realize to themselves that a site is outdated or that a school doesn't look like it's together, but they definitely know when they see a site that's been put together in a way, it has a CMS where content is being updated, social media is there, there's syndicated information, so on and so forth. So that's the high-level difference, we'd say, between a refresh and a redesign. And just to put some visuals to it, here we are with a lot of paneling, and after a little bit of work, a completely different feel and approach towards the general impression of the site, but really things are structurally the same versus, again, knocking some walls down, shifting the location of appliances, bringing in major technology. So not to beat that over the head too much, but I think everybody understands that. So what is the process and what was the problem and the opportunity that was in front of us when looking at the Bryn Mawr site? Well, we met with Bryn Mawr first in November of last year, 2009, and they were in a little bit of a jam because their 125th anniversary is this year. Nobody was happy with the website design. I think everybody was feeling like it was cluttered and maybe not representing them well. It wasn't attractive, and there was just something missing. As well as the issue of the aesthetics not being correct, there were a tremendous number of complaints about some of the usability not being there. So people couldn't find things, and that was really a major issue. And then finally, I think the notion of the brand needing to be revitalized was maybe one of the better expressions of the fact that the design wasn't working for them. You know, it was a site, it was put together, it certainly has a lot of information on it, but does it really say anything about Bryn Mawr, and what does it say? And some of the considerations that we were looking at when we were deciding what we could do with the site was the fact that, you know, this wasn't your 500-page or 1,000-page website, which maybe we could crank out in a couple of days or over the weekend. It's 13,000 pages, so it's a decent enough size site where you really have to stop and take stock of what the situation is. The new design, in an optimal scenario, was going to be desired less than 2.5 months, or 3 months rather, away, 11 weeks. But if you start deducting for Christmas vacation and New Year's and the holidays around Thanksgiving, then you really don't have even those number of weeks. It's really more like an 8-week project. And then finally, Bryn Mawr had a fairly rigid template structure that had been pretty meticulously coded in terms of PHP includes, and that left us with a situation go in there with a record. So looking at all of these different issues, and then looking at what we did have in terms of assets, which were a really dedicated team, and very clean SS, as well as the fact that content had been produced to revitalize the brand by Bryn Mawr's partner, Marion Hill at Saltwater. We took a look at this and said, okay, this is a definite refresh versus redesign situation. And if we can get this done for them in about 8 weeks or so, then let's all. So what was the process for actually going ahead and doing something? Well, the first thing that we do before we do anything else is audit. And auditing is something that we love doing. It's basically the act of us sitting down and doing an expert review on your website, trying to look at all angles from the brand to usability to functionality to editorial support, and just basically make sure that we understand as quickly as we can the whole picture of what the possibilities are, as well as what the status quo is. And then went through a fairly abbreviated information architecture review and revision process. We'll show you some of the details associated with that, including sitemaps and wireframes. Went through a process which involves what we call strategic art direction. And then finally, the last piece of it was really about implementation and integrating content and getting things to move. So that was the quick process. You can't get access to this any place. But first impressions. Fawn and I sat here and talked about it a couple of months ago, and then we sort of relived that conversation last week. But the first impression is this site is incredibly dense and busy. There's so much stuff going on. You've got multiple nav bars. You've got some sort of dynamic element here. There are boxes everywhere, very, very tight gutters. And then typography is treated in 1, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, at least 10 different ways. Here's 10, 11, 12. You've got a number of nav bars, and some of the words are familiar, like admissions and academics, but then you've got things like character, which are not necessarily what we would consider. I want to keep that in mind, because you've got perspectives, in particular in parents, who may be looking at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 websites, and the more in line you can be with other practices, the more familiar your site is going to be to them. There are quotes here that entice you to maybe find out more, and some of them were from pretty amazing people. President at Harvard, for example, but no titles were there, and there was no indication of who this person might be. And then on the sidebar over here, you're looking at a number of different elements, everything from a health notification to something about a lecture to a pretty important module here, something about admissions, but all of it being treated the same way with fairly low contrast and somewhat muddy background images. So is this really representing the information? And then I think the last things to really note here is there are a number of repeating or randomizing images here, but you don't know what they are. You don't know who these people are. You don't know what the college stands for. And Bryn Mawr is an amazing place. It's one of the foremost women's institutions in the country. There's nothing here about the brand value or what they say about themselves or how they're different from other schools. And so this is really a very interesting situation, because in a lot of cases we're pushing our clients to generate more content and to make sure that their homepages feel more dynamic, more alive. In this case, you see a lot of content here, but there's absolutely no brand message. There's no messaging, no indication of what they stand for and where they are. And so if we have to take everything that's here and really